My wife and I are executives at a top company. Get out of here, you high school grad. The glitzy wedding venue reverberated with Mike's mocking voice. In a moment, the animated discussions that had occupied the room ceased. What a terrible guy he was to despise me, even in this setting. I had taken time out of my day to attend, and he treated me this way because I was at a loss for words. I made a choice after witnessing Mike's extremely impolite actions. Mike was about to meet a startling end. I'm Jack Smith, and I'm 35 years old. Let me briefly describe my turbulent life to date. My grandparents' home is where I was born and reared. After divorcing my dad, my mom returned to live with them, where she gave birth to me. Unfortunately, though, my mother's bad health caused her to die shortly after I was born. I didn't have parents because of this. That does not, however, imply that I was not content. I was lovingly and carefully reared by my grandparents. They brought me wherever I wanted to go and provided me pocket money so I wouldn't feel deprived. I never experienced unlove as a child because of them. I put a lot of effort into my studies because I wanted to make my grandparents pleased. They were happier and encouraged me more the harder I studied. I initially put a lot of effort into my studies for my grandparents' benefit, but as time went on, I developed a love for learning and was constantly in the top class. My homeroom instructor believed that I had a lot of promise because of this. Go to any school you like and pursue any career you want, my grandparents advised me, pleased with my academic achievements. Don't stress over the money. But they were growing too old to continue working indefinitely. Their lifestyles would have to become more economical if I attended college. I gave up on college because I didn't want to put any more strain on my cherished grandparents. People gave me a disbelieving look when I informed them I would be starting a job immediately after high school. But when I started working, I reminded myself that studying wasn't just for school. I was hired by a large chain of restaurants. I had no prior customer service experience, so I was initially at a loss. Susan, my boss, gently taught me everything from the beginning, even the right way to welcome customers. She covered all the fundamentals, including how to greet people appropriately and accept orders. Susan, who was married, stated that she loved me as much as she would have her own son because her eldest child was my age. She even offered me kind consolation when I had a client complaint regarding my service. Everyone initially faces difficulties. You will gradually recover, so don't worry. Her presence gave me a great deal of emotional comfort. I was always so tired when I got home. My grandparents were concerned about me as though I were their own issue after observing my condition. You've always overexerted yourself, Jack. You must improve your ability to take breaks. We have a new pillow for you. Hopefully, using it while you sleep can help you feel more rested. Hey, we purchased your preferred munchies. Together, let's take a seat and enjoy them. When I felt exhausted, my grandparents did everything they could to lift my spirits. Thanks to everyone's support, I gradually got used to the job, and here I am today. However, my peaceful life took a sudden turn when someone appeared. As usual, I went to work and was preparing for lunch service when a group of businessmen came into the restaurant where I worked. They were on their lunch break, and their particularly loud voices echoed throughout the entire place. They're pretty lively, aren't they? I thought to myself as I was getting ready to take their order. When I approached their table, I noticed one man in the group staring intensely at my face. I ignored it, took their order, and was about to leave the table when that man said something completely unexpected to me. Hey, you're Jack, right? It's me, Mike. Mike? No way. I was at a loss for words. Seeing that I was silent, Mike continued talking. Don't you remember? Back in middle school, we used to compete over our test scores. I never competed with Mike over test scores. That was something he did on his own, but I remembered Mike very well. There was no way I could forget because Mike was the worst. He used to treat me like I was poor just because I was raised by my grandparents. I remember you, I said. When I said that, Mike started laughing. So, I heard you didn't go to college. We used to compete over test scores, but in the end, you couldn't afford to go anywhere because you're poor. His colleagues joined in, laughing along with him. Well, people still stop at high school these days. Seriously, man. I wanted to get away from that table immediately, but of course, I couldn't just walk off. Even though I tried to keep my emotions from showing, it seemed they were written all over my face. Mike picked up on it and started mocking me again. What's the matter? Got something to say? No, you don't. A high school grad like you can't stand up to someone like me, a graduate of a prestigious university. He laughed loudly, as if it was the funniest thing in the world. I brushed it off as best as I could and made a quick escape back to the kitchen. Susan, who had seen everything, looked at me with concern. "Who was that guy?" "That was unbelievably rude," she said, furious. Her tone was sharp and angry. "He's always been like that. He's used every possible way to look down on me just because I was raised by my grandparents. Even now, as an adult, he hasn't changed one bit from how he was in middle school." Hearing this, Susan's face twisted in anger. "The truth is, Mike has always had it out for me, and I think I know why. It all started when we first entered middle school. Most of our classmates went to after-school tutoring programs and studied hard. Mike was one of them. He had been attending tutoring programs since he was little and was considered a top student, someone who stood out in class. Meanwhile, I couldn't bring myself to ask my grandparents to pay for tutoring, so I studied alone at the library. When I ended up taking the top spot in our grade, everyone was shocked. "Jack, you almost got perfect scores in every subject. That's amazing, especially since you don't even go to tutoring," my classmates praised me. But in the corner of the classroom, Mike glared at me with frustration. From that moment on, his attitude toward me visibly worsened. "Jack, what kind of trick did you use to cheat?" Every time we had a test, Mike accused me of being a cheater. It was obvious he couldn't handle the fact that he couldn't beat me. Of course, I never cheated, but our classmates were probably too scared of Mike to stand up to him. I endured his harassment until we were finally placed in different classes. Later in middle school, I shared the story with Susan. Susan was so furious, she looked like she might breathe fire. "So it's just jealousy because he couldn't be number one on the test?" she asked. "That's unacceptable. It's all in the past now, and I'm not planning to dig it back up, so it's fine." Susan let out a deep sigh at my words. While I could let go of being falsely accused of cheating, there was one thing I could never forgive. It happened at our middle school graduation. Since I didn't have parents, my grandparents attended the ceremony with me. None of my other classmates said anything, but Mike, in a loud and deliberate voice, mocked and belittled my grandparents for everyone to hear. "You don't have parents? What poor-looking grandparents you have." I didn't care how much he insulted me, but I couldn't forgive him for speaking that way about my grandparents. Anger surged inside me just as I was about to shout at Mike. My grandparents, standing beside me, desperately stopped me. "Let it go. Raising your voice will only waste your time," my grandfather said gently, holding my shoulder. My grandmother also rubbed my back to calm me down. After the graduation ceremony ended, we left the venue without interacting with any of my classmates. That incident made me hope I'd never have to see Mike again. But here he was, unexpectedly walking into the restaurant where I worked. Noticing my distress, Susan told me I didn't have to go back to the hall while Mike was still there. I didn't want to hear any more of Mike's snide remarks, so I decided to take Susan up on her kind offer and stayed away from the hall. I waited near the kitchen, hoping for Mike to leave soon. However, a few minutes later, I heard a loud voice coming from the register. "Hey Jack, are you hiding because you're scared of me?" It was Mike. His voice echoed across the restaurant, malicious and taunting. The other customers looked around, wondering what was going on. If this continued, it would definitely disturb the other guests. Reluctantly, I went to the register where Mike was. "I'm not hiding, but could you please keep your voice down in the restaurant?" I said, then started ringing up Mike's order. However, he didn't seem to like what I said and began getting angry. "Whether I'm quiet or not isn't up to you. I'm spending money in this lousy restaurant, so don't you dare tell me what to do." I was stunned by his arrogance. Still, I reminded myself that he was a customer and held back, suppressing my emotions. Seeing me stay silent, Mike raised his voice even more. "By the way, I heard a rumor you were unemployed after middle school. Are you mocking society? You should be like me, study hard, and get a job at a top-tier company. Then, maybe, just maybe, I'll bother to listen to what you have to say." He puffed out his chest, acting like he was the best. I couldn't understand how someone could live with such overconfidence. As I let out a big sigh, Susan stepped in and took over the register for me. Her expression was stiff with anger. "I'll be back to eat here again," Mike said, as he and his group laughed their way out of the restaurant. The place fell silent, as if the storm had finally passed. I couldn't stop feeling irritated. Then Susan looked straight at me. "That man is just the worst. Let's ignore him. He's a pitiful person without a shred of humanity," Susan said, starting to clean up the table where Mike had been sitting. "She's right," I thought. Looking down on others, even as an adult, is truly the behavior of a terrible person. I decided to focus on the tasks in front of me and not let him bother me. I resolved to treat Mike as nothing more than a bad dream and forget about him. Soon enough, my peaceful days returned. I gradually forgot about Mike's visit and his condescending remarks. One sweltering summer day, I went to work as usual. The oppressive heat was draining everyone's energy. "It's so hot today. I bet the restaurant will be packed with people looking for a cool place to eat," Susan said, then got busy with the preparations. Taking a cue from her, I got the restaurant ready as well. When the restaurant opened, just as Susan predicted, it quickly filled up with customers. Susan, the other staff, and I were all rushing around trying to keep up with the demand. Then, the door swung open with a bang. "It's so hot, and it's way too crowded in here." Yeah, no kidding. Mike and his colleagues had walked in. There are plenty of other restaurants in this area besides ours, and yet, for some reason, Mike keeps coming to this one. Seeing him again felt like a recurring nightmare, and I started getting a headache. I decided to ignore him. The restaurant was too busy, and I didn't have time to deal with Mike's antics. But then Mike stood up and started walking toward me. I was stunned. What now? He finally stopped right in front of me. I avoided his gaze and focused on clearing a nearby table. But Mike, ignoring my efforts to stay out of his way, threw an outrageous demand at me. "Hurry up and get us a table. We're busy people. Give us priority seating." He sounded irritable and entitled. However, many customers had arrived before Mike and his group and were patiently waiting for tables to open up, so such a selfish demand couldn't be accommodated. The waiting customers around him shot him puzzled and annoyed looks. I firmly raised my voice and said, "There are people who arrived before you and are waiting for a table. Please wait your turn like everyone else." Mike erupted in anger. "Are you seriously prioritizing these random strangers over me, your former classmate?" Mike's voice echoed throughout the restaurant. The customers who heard his extremely rude remarks looked visibly uncomfortable. Susan quickly rushed over to see what was going on. "Mike," I said, "your demands are nothing more than childish selfishness. Being classmates has nothing to do with it. Waiting your turn is just basic decency." When I said that, Mike let out a loud click of his tongue, then he glared at me. "Decency? Don't talk to me about decency. You're just a high school graduate who didn't even go to college and used to be a deadbeat." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My academic background had nothing to do with Mike. I was completely fed up with his constant need to flaunt his education to assert superiority. Besides, anyone could see that Mike was the one lacking basic decency. This time, I couldn't stay quiet. My patience had reached its limit. "Your college degree doesn't matter here. Everyone else is waiting their turn, so you need to wait too." But Mike just laughed. "Just seat us already. We're busy people coming here on a break from work. These other customers are probably just wasting time. Anyway, prioritizing as top-tier business professionals is only logical." That's when I realized there was no reasoning with him. I couldn't fathom how someone could grow into such an arrogant and twisted person. As I stood speechless, Susan raised her voice. "Sir, if you cannot wait your turn, you're disrupting the other customers, and we'll have to ask you to leave." Mike's face turned bright red upon hearing Susan's words. His colleagues nudged him with their elbows. "Come on, Mike, let's just go. It's not worth it." But Mike, still fuming, turned his anger towards Susan. "Are you defying me? I'm not so pathetic that I'll take orders from someone like you. Just seat us already." The other customers in the restaurant stared at Mike, their disapproval evident. At this point, the scene was beyond salvaging. I felt that even though it went against my principles, seating him first might be the only way to end this commotion. But then, to my surprise, the waiting customers started speaking up. "Are you even a professional? Don't you feel ashamed for not being able to wait your turn? Yeah, do you think throwing a tantrum will get you seated faster? That's what a child would do." Mike seemed stunned, clearly not expecting such remarks from the other customers. Taking advantage of the silence, Susan and I escorted Mike and his colleagues out of the restaurant. When Susan and I apologized to the customers for the commotion, they smiled and said, "It must be tough dealing with someone like that." We managed to resolve the situation peacefully, but I hoped it would never happen again. If Mike comes back, I'll refuse to let him in. That's the decision I made at the time. However, since that incident, Mike never returned to the restaurant. Years passed, and before I knew it, I was 35 years old. Time flies so quickly. On this particular day, I'd taken time off work to attend a wedding. At this age, wedding invitations become more frequent. I found myself attending weddings of acquaintances almost every month. As for me, I had no plans to get married and wasn't even dating anyone. I often thought it might be time to consider marriage, but I used my busy work schedule as an excuse not to pursue a relationship. When I arrived at the wedding venue, I was struck by the grand entrance. I had attended many weddings before, but this one was special. To be honest, I hadn't wanted to attend, but I couldn't refuse the request of someone who had helped me a lot. After checking in at the reception, I walked inside and saw a crowd gathered. Curious, I peeked to see what was happening, and there stood Mike in a tuxedo. Yes, today I was attending Mike's wedding. Of course, I wasn't invited by him. I was attending on behalf of someone who couldn't make it. Knowing in advance that it was Mike's wedding, I hadn't been enthusiastic about coming, but I still showed up. When Mike saw me, his face was filled with shock. "Why are you at my wedding?" "I didn't invite you," he raised his voice at me. But I wasn't the same person who would back down from him anymore. I had learned something that made me realize I didn't need to fear Mike. "You're right, you didn't invite me. Then why are you here? I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Both my wife and I are executives at a top company. Get out of here, you high school dropout." Mike spoke with his usual arrogance. His condescending voice echoed through the glamorous wedding venue. The room, which had been filled with cheerful conversations, fell silent in an instant. At that moment, the bride, Sarah, appeared in a glamorous white wedding dress. She looked at me with suspicion, as if I were some kind of intruder. Mike, full of sarcasm, began introducing me without permission. "Oh, this guy, he's Jack, an old classmate of mine. Honestly, it's embarrassing to even call him that. He's just a high school grad who didn't go to college, and I heard he was unemployed for a while." Hearing this, Sarah laughed. "What? Someone like that is your friend?" "Of course not. He showed up uninvited," Mike said, looking at me and laughing loudly as if I'd crashed a wedding without being invited. I was genuinely irritated by Mike's ridiculous remarks. "Are you two really executives at a top company?" I spoke out emotionally. The two of them exchanged glances and started laughing. "Of course we are. Doubting us just shows how jealous you are. You're so rude." It was obvious who was being rude here. I couldn't hold back any longer. "Really? I don't remember promoting either of you." At that moment, a loud voice came from behind me. Everyone immediately turned their attention to the source of the voice. "Jack." It was James, the vice president of the company where Mike worked. James looked shocked to see me there, even trembling slightly. Mike, noticing this, spoke in a puzzled tone. "James, do you actually know this high school grad?" He had the nerve to doubt that we're executives at a top company. What a worthless guy. As soon as Mike finished speaking, James raised his voice. "Mike, how dare you speak so rudely? You have no idea who you're talking to." "What? He's just a high school grad." Mike clearly didn't understand the situation. Sarah looked equally confused. James then began explaining the truth. "How do you not know this? This man is the president of Johnson Group, which oversees not just our company, but 50 others." "What? That's impossible." "Yeah, there's no way he could be a president. Look at him." Their endless rudeness and unfiltered remarks left me utterly speechless. James, however, confronted them with yet another undeniable truth. "Jack is the son of Steve Johnson, the chairman of Johnson Group." The room buzzed with murmurs. "Johnson Group? That's the company that runs all those big-name businesses, isn't it? So Jack is way above Mike in status." Mike and Sarah stared at me in disbelief. I decided it was time to confirm the truth myself. "James is right. I'm the president of Johnson Group. I took over from my father, the chairman." Mike still looked like he couldn't accept it. "You used to work at a restaurant. How could someone like that be a CEO? And your last name is completely different," Mike shouted, his voice trembling as cold sweat ran down his face. "That restaurant is part of the Johnson Group. I worked there to gain first-hand experience and observe how the business operates as part of my preparation to become the CEO. Also, after my mother's divorce, I took her last name. That's why my last name is different from my father's. It's perfectly normal." Mike's face turned pale in an instant. Sarah also fell completely silent. "Yes, the truth is that I am the CEO of Johnson Group, which oversees 50 companies. The reason I, a high school graduate, became a CEO has everything to do with my biological father. When I decided to enter the workforce with just a high school diploma, I struggled to find a job. My grandparents watched me with concern as I desperately searched for employment every day. It must have been hard for them to see me going through such a tough time. They contacted my biological father, whose contact information they had, and sought his help. My father came to my grandparents' house immediately. It was the first time I ever saw him. The moment he saw me, he hugged me tightly. That day we talked for hours, catching up on everything we had missed. He told me how he had wanted to send money for me, but was turned down by my grandparents. He also revealed that he had watched me from afar and had always hoped we could work together someday. "If you want, I'll pay for you to go to college," my father offered. However, I hadn't decided to join the workforce on a whim. My resolve hadn't changed. Seeing my determination, my father provided me with a job. That's how I started working at that restaurant. Only Susan knew my true identity, but she didn't treat me any differently, even knowing I was the future CEO. Instead, she taught me all about the restaurant business. It was during this time that I reunited with Mike. Later, when my father retired, I took over as CEO, and here I am today. As for this wedding, my father was the one originally invited. When he couldn't attend, I came in his place. When I saw the invitation, I discovered that Mike worked for a company under Johnson Group. Now, Mike and Sarah finally seemed to accept that I was, in fact, the CEO. I glanced at the two of them and asked James a question. "Is it true that these two are executives?" James straightened his posture and began explaining. "Well, actually, Sarah's father's company has a business relationship with ours, and one of the conditions for the partnership was to promote Sarah and Mike. So they were both recently promoted to department managers. But that was the first time I learned about this. Promoting executives under such conditions was absolutely unacceptable. I raised my voice at James. I do not approve of their promotions. Revoke them immediately." As soon as I said that, Sarah raised her voice at me. "Jack, if you do that, my father will be furious. The deal will fall through." She framed it as concern for the company, but it was clear she was more upset about losing her position. Her selfishness was apparent. I couldn't help but laugh. Everyone in the room was now focused on me. "We'll be fine without your company's business. If one deal could ruin us, we wouldn't have grown this big in the first place. Besides, I have no interest in working with a company that makes such ridiculous demands." When I said that, Mike staggered as if he was about to collapse. James wore an embarrassed expression, clearly uncomfortable. Sarah's father, who had rushed over after hearing the commotion, looked like he was on the verge of fainting. "But I've been loyal to Johnson Group for so many years. My company exists because of Johnson Group. If we lose this deal, my company will be finished." He looked at me with pleading eyes. "That's not my problem. If that's the case, you shouldn't have made such unreasonable demands," I replied. Sarah stood there in shock. Mike stared at me with wide eyes. "So we're going back to being regular employees?" Mike's weak words. Sarah let out a sigh. "Mike, I've heard that you've been bullying your subordinates because you're a manager and you act arrogantly, even outside the company. To be honest, you two are a disgrace to our group. People like you don't deserve to be managers." When I said that, Mike snapped. "Why should I let someone like you talk down to me? You're just riding on your father's coattails. A worthless high school graduate like you can't boss me around." I couldn't understand why he thought it was okay to shout at me, so I decided to hit him with one more truth to drive the point home. "You haven't changed at all since the old days. Academic credentials have nothing to do with work. In fact, there are people with degrees who still commit fraud at their jobs." A heavy silence filled the room. Recently, the company's finances hadn't been adding up. I looked into it and discovered that funds were being withdrawn from your computer. "Care to explain?" I spoke as calmly as I could. Mike began trembling violently, clearly shaken. James widened his eyes in shock. "Mike, is this true?" Mike struggled to suppress his shaking voice and answered softly. "Well, I borrowed a little to cover the wedding costs, but I was going to pay it back right away." "I swear." "Pay it back? You can't just take company money like it's yours. That's a crime. What were you thinking?" James scolded him harshly. Mike shook. "I'm so sorry, Jack. You'll forgive me, right? We're friends, aren't we?" "Friends? Mike and I? Not a chance." I couldn't help but laugh. The idea of Mike and I being friends was as impossible as the sky falling. True friends never look down on one another. "Did you ever treat me with respect, Mike?" Mike looked down, silent. He must have realized he had no defense left. "We were never friends from the moment we met, and even if we were, what you've done is unforgivable. If you had sincerely apologized, I might have considered letting you stay as a regular employee. But that doesn't seem likely. As of today, you're fired. Fired. And my words were like a hammer. Mike collapsed to his knees on the spot. The once glamorous wedding venue was now shrouded in an uneasy atmosphere. Breaking the tense silence, Sarah suddenly shouted something no one had expected. I'm not marrying an unemployed man. This is all your fault. I'm calling off the wedding. Sarah let out a thunderous shout, leaving the guests in the venue visibly stunned. I did all of this for you. Don't say that. Mike looked utterly confused. But Sarah raised her voice even more. For me? Are you blaming me for everything? This is all because you couldn't treat Jack with kindness. Stop blaming others for your mistakes. The guests watched the scene unfold, holding their breath. In a fury, Sarah stormed out of the venue. Mike desperately tried to chase after her, but Sarah's pace was too quick, and he couldn't catch up. He collapsed to his knees at the entrance and began crying pathetically. The wedding was called off, and Mike and Sarah's marriage plans were canceled. Afterward, I fired Mike for his misuse of company funds. Mike kept making excuses until the very end, desperately trying to stay with the company, but I didn't pay him any attention. I knew if he returned, he would inevitably repeat the same behavior. Moreover, someone who evaluates people solely based on their academic background has no place in my company. On the other hand, Sarah couldn't bear being pointed at in the company as the woman who almost married someone who had been fired. She abruptly resigned, and now no one knows where she is or what she's doing. As for me, I continue to work hard as the CEO. Academic credentials don't determine a person's work worth. If you encounter someone who uses their education as a reason to boast, let them know they're mistaken. My tumultuous life has taken a turn for the better, and I'm moving forward one step at a time. I plan to keep walking steadily along this path, making progress each day.